Buenos dias und herzlich willkommen bei Gate 7, deinem Podcast über Fernweh und Fotografie. In dieser Show geht es um Menschen, für die Reisen mehr ist als Spaß und Erholung. Freue dich auf praktische Tipps und Tricks, wie du tief in fremde Kulturen eintauchst und lerne, deine Abenteuer in bewegenden Bildern festzuhalten, egal mit welcher Kamera. Bist du bereit? Dann los, lass uns abheben mit deinem Gastgeber, Kai Beermann.
Musiker, Kellner und Priester. Anhand seiner eigenen Biografie verrät Sean Tucker in seinem Buch Sinn in der Kreativität finden, wie er zu einem Fotografen geworden ist, dem heute mehr als 500.000 Menschen auf YouTube und Instagram folgen. Mit seiner authentischen Art zeichnet er einen Weg, der Kunst mit Psychologie, Philosophie und Spiritualität verbindet. Er sagt, "My camera had become a sort of therapy, a tool of self-discovery." Ja, die Kamera als Therapeut und als Werkzeug der Selbstfindung, darum geht es auch in diesem Interview. Wir sprechen darüber, warum sich Menschen nach Sinn sehen und welche Rolle in diesem Zusammenhang die Kreativität spielt. Mit dem menschlichen Drang, sich in der Kunst auszudrücken, beschäftigt sich Sean Tucker seit Jahren. Auf dem Weg zu seiner eigenen künstlerischen Stimme spannt er den Bogen, wie gesagt, über viele Felder. Psychologie, Philosophie und Spiritualität spielen damit rein und auf YouTube erreicht er damit ein Millionen-Publikum. Er ermuntert dazu, sich nicht zu stark an anderen zu orientieren, sondern sein eigenes Rennen zu bestreiten. Run your own race. Doch bevor wir loslegen, mahnt er zum Innehalten. Am Anfang geht es darum, so Sean Tucker, uns selbst kennenzulernen und die Frage zu klären, was wir eigentlich sagen möchten. Ja, ich habe schon viele Fotografinnen und Fotografen in diesem Podcast interviewt, aber das Gespräch mit Sean zählt definitiv zu den absoluten Highlights bisher. Ich hoffe, du hast genauso viel Freude daran. Falls du Sean bisher noch nicht kanntest, dann rate ich dir auf jeden Fall dazu, dir seinen YouTube-Kanal anzuschauen. Noch einen Blick auf Instagram lohnt sich. Das behandelt er so ein bisschen wie ein Skizzenblog. Ganz tolle Fotos, die er dort täglich postet. Und natürlich das Buch Sinn in der Kreativität finden. Das Gespräch haben wir wie immer im Rahmen von Abenteuer Reportagefotografie aufgezeichnet. Unterstützt hat mich dabei Thomas Jones. Und wenn du auch künftig mit dabei sein möchtest bei den Aufnahmen zum Gate 7 Podcast live via Zoom, dann schau dir das Ganze mal an. Die Links findest du alle auf der Webseite www.gate7.de/Sean-Tucker. Gate 7, 7 ausgeschrieben, nicht als Zahl. Ja, und wir haben uns was einfallen lassen für all diejenigen, die nicht das ganze Kursprogramm mitmachen möchten. Bei Abenteuer Reportagefotografie gibt es jetzt auch die Option, nur die Podcast-Aufnahmen live mit zu verfolgen. Das ist ein etwas günstigeres Paket. Vielleicht ist das ja was für dich. Schau einfach mal vorbei. Auch wenn du den Podcast schon länger hörst und ihn unterstützen möchtest, ist das eine wunderbare Art und Weise, wie du das tun kannst. Ich würde mich sehr freuen, wenn du mit dabei bist. So, jetzt aber genug der Vorrede. Lass uns einsteigen in das Interview mit Sean Tucker. Viel Spaß! Hello, Sean. Good evening. Thank you for taking the time for this interview. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Sean, we're going to talk about your book, The Meaning in the Making, and the subtitle is The Why and How Behind Our Human Need to Create. First question, when did you first feel the need to create something?
I think I've always had that, even from a child. I think I was always looking for something to make. It became a bit like therapy, you know, sitting down to do something creative helped me to sort of think things through. And I think it was very peaceful to do. So I reckon it was always different things. It changed as I went along. But like at the start, I think it was drawing. Like I just loved to sit down, and I used to take books full of animal photographs. I used to love animals. So I had lots of these lovely sort of National Geographic books that I would take and find a really interesting animal and try and draw it, usually just with pencil. So I think as a child, that was one of the big the sort of first stops of like, I need to make something where, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't photography back then, and now these days it's mostly photography and video for you. What I really like about your book, it's not just for photographers, it's for everybody who wants to start a creative life, no matter what the medium is. When did you come up with that idea to go in that direction with your book?
I was on a trip to Iceland. It was, I think it was my 40th birthday. And I'd rented a little log cabin on the south coast. And I went on my own. And I remember because my idea was to go out and do a bunch of video work and do a bunch of landscape work. But Iceland in September decided to be a week of storms. So I was stuck in this tiny cabin, drinking too much coffee, looking out the window at sideways sleet. And I'd rented some stupidly inappropriate car that wouldn't be able to do 4x4. So I just kind of had to sit there and wait for the gaps in the weather. And while I was sitting there, I decided to give myself an exercise, something to do, to pass the time. And I thought, I'd been doing the YouTube channel for about 3 years at that point, I think. And I thought, I wonder if, because I was frustrated about the fact that video is often a very limited format, in that I was making 10 to 20 minute videos, but you can only kind of skim a topic in that time. You can't dig too deep. And I was like, I've got so much more to say about this stuff. I wonder what I could do to really kind of nail my creative philosophy down in one thing. And I thought maybe a book is the way to do that. So I started to sketch out just chapter outlines, what chapters would run in sequence, and the different topics I talk about in each, and what maybe stories from my life could sort of pepper throughout so that I could illustrate the things that I was talking about. And that was where I first started to come up with the framework for it. That's where the idea came from.
Mm-hmm. You start out the book with a chapter where you talk about how important it is to first look inward, and not to just, we often might feel the urge to jump ahead, to create something before thinking or stepping back and really thinking about what we want to say. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's also social media that kind of drives us that way, because it's so quick and we have to always feel the need to put out something to keep up with the pace of others. Can you talk a little bit or elaborate on that thought, why it's so important to ask yourself what I actually want to say before starting to create something?
Yeah, I think all good art comes out of who we are as individuals, and that's a mix of a lot of things. So it's to do with our upbringing, who our parents were, what our family was like, what our personalities like, whether that's born in us genetically or we grow over time and are shaped by society. And it includes things like the things that we care about in the world, the topics that we think are important, the things that we see in the world we feel needs to change. When you see yourself as honestly as you can, and that includes your light and shadow, like the good stuff and the bad stuff. If you get really honest about who you are, I think that's the part of your journey where you find the things that only you were built to say. And I think too often, I mean, you mentioned social media. I think too often nowadays, people feel that the reason to make something is to get attention or money for it online. So they're looking around and they're going, what stuff works? What photographs feed the algorithm well on Instagram? I'll make that, and then I'll get people giving me likes, and that'll make me feel good. And that's this little closed circle. But at no point in that equation do you work out what you need to say. You're just looking for other people's stuff that works, so you'll copy it. And I think it's fine to start as an artist like that, copying other people's work. But I think at some point when we grow up and start to become more mature artists, it starts with that getting to know ourselves, what we care about, what we uniquely have to say, what we're skilled to say. And then we can start making things, taking all that stuff into account. I mean, my YouTube channel is sort of an example of that, because I think when I started out a YouTube channel, I could have just made another photography channel where I sort of, review some cameras and give some techniques. But I pushed myself a little bit harder than that. And I said, hang on, but there's lots of people doing that. What do you have to say that's uniquely you? And then I started to think, well, I studied psychology at university. Maybe there's something in that. I used to be a pastor. Maybe there's some sort of spirituality, life philosophy stuff I can bring into this as well. And when I started to pay more attention to the things that were in me uniquely because of my journey and my personality and the things I care about, and I started to put those into the videos I made, then they started to get a flavor of their own that I think can be more unique to what I have to say. So I always push that any artist who wants to find their creative voice, it's always going to start and end with a lot of introspection and self-awareness and honesty about who you are and what you have to say.
Now, when you talk about putting really yourself, your inner self out there and creating the art that's in you and not copying others, and especially on Instagram, social media, YouTube, if you break these norms and you're putting yourself out there like that, and we all know the internet can be a hard place. The critique that's coming back can be brutal at times. There's no other way to say it. You've got an interesting chapter about critique and feedback that you receive. Did that change when you started creating your own things? Were you more vulnerable for the critique, or did you already have a way to deal with it?
Yes, definitely more vulnerable. I think any time, and that's why I think it's doing that as the work of kind of the second half of your creative journey. We've moved a little bit beyond those beginning stages, because it takes a lot of courage. The more of yourself you put into your work, the more it stings when you get the critique back, because it's not just somebody saying, I don't like the photograph you took. It starts to feel a little bit like they might not like you, because there's so much of you in the work you're making. So yeah, that's definitely something you factor in. But in that chapter you talk about in critique, I basically kind of outline who you should be listening to. And I think if you're going to start to share your work online, especially if you really put your heart and soul into that work, you have to stop taking the general noise so seriously, because you don't know where it's coming from. And that goes, by the way, for the positive stuff and the negative stuff, because you might get loads of people on your photographs going, oh, you're amazing, this is brilliant. Like, I get that quite often, people saying stuff like that on my photographs, but I know I'm not. I know I've got a long way to go. And actually, when it comes to great photographers, I'm nothing on great photographers. And if I took that stuff, even the positive stuff, too seriously, I might get a big head and slow my growth because I think I've arrived. That's equally a mistake. So I think in the book, I say that there's kind of two tests for which critique you should take seriously. They should pass two tests. The first is that they know what they're talking about, because you often get people on YouTube channels or Instagram on your photographs who will just say nasty things about your work. But my challenge is go click on their work, because I've never encountered a talented troll. I've never found someone leaving mean comments. And then you go through and you look at their work and go, oh my gosh, they're just amazing. Not once has that happened. It's always somebody who's obviously a frustrated creative, and they're angry that they're not getting good as fast as they want to, or not seeing success on their work. And so instead of doing the hard work to better themselves, they're going around to other people's work, leaving mean comments, trying to bring the people that they're jealous of down to their level a bit. They can't balance it by moving up, so they'll try bring you down. And that's obviously something not to be taken seriously. If you change your work based on people like that, it would be a huge mistake to listen to them. And the second test is, do they care about you? Because I can hear negative comments from people if I can feel that they're telling me because they care about my journey and they want me to be a better artist. I think Theodore Roosevelt said, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And it's this idea that I can listen to anybody say anything, even really difficult things. And I have close friends who can say very, very harsh things to me, but I'll listen all day and I'll take it seriously because I know that ultimately they care about me and my journey. So if you want to start to sift critique online, most of it is noise. Most of it is noise. And to take it seriously or respond to it or push back to it is almost always a mistake, because they just want attention anyway. So do they know what they're talking about? And do they really care about you? Or have they got another agenda? It's always a good test.
How long did that take you to realize that, or to not to let it come too close to you? Like, now you have a huge following on social media, over 500,000 on YouTube and Instagram. Over the years, was it a difficult process for you to know how to deal with your social following?
Yeah, it still is. Honestly, I mean, I still have to battle. I can talk about this stuff. I haven't got it all worked out though. And I mean, we used to have a saying when I was studying to be a pastor, is we preach best what we need to hear the most. And I think like I definitely have that. So I think I can talk about that stuff because I still struggle with it. I still have an ego that wants to push back on people and argue and set them straight because they don't know and I know better. And often it is people who don't know as well as you. They're just being mean, but they don't really understand enough to do it properly, and they're easily to dismantle. But the day it changed for me was when I was going backwards and forwards with somebody on Instagram, and I suddenly had this second where I don't know who I'm talking to, you know? And then I thought, would I still be doing this? Would I still be going backwards and forwards with them? And they're getting more and more angry, I can tell. And I'm kind of laughing about it. Would I be doing this if I knew that that is a 15-year-old who lives at home in a family life that's very, very difficult? Dad's left, mom's abusive, and he's really struggling with mental health issues. Would I still be doing that? I don't know who I'm talking to. It might be that person. And if it is that person, I'm just being an intellectual bully at that point. And it suddenly made me realize, actually, I don't know whether the person I'm talking to, it has more or less power than me. So maybe I should just shut up and treat everyone kindly, even if they don't treat me with kindness. That anger is usually a frustration about themselves and has nothing to do with me anyway. So that was the day it changed. And that was probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And then slowly since then, I'm trying to grow up and not respond to every comment that pokes. And most of the time I manage it, and sometimes I fail.
Well, failure is a part of it.
Yeah.
Sean, you talk a lot about philosophy, spirituality, and your interest in human psychology. How has that influenced your work as a creator? You said that a rich life and interest, they can feed your creative ideas and the kind of work you put out there and to find your voice. Take us a little bit on your personal journey. What did that look like?
I think I've always, even from a child, I was always a very spiritually curious child. So I was sent to a Roman Catholic boarding school here in the UK when my family were living out in Africa. And even then I was very fascinated by religion, but also about ghost stories and anything kind of otherworldly. I was always that kid who was very interested in that stuff. And then after school, I went and worked for the church. So well, first of all, I did my psychology degree. So it included psychology, sociology was including the human mind and how we think and what we're motivated by. So that was a choice because I found that stuff fascinating. And then moving into the church and working for the church was more of that kind of spirituality stuff, but it was pointed more in South Africa at young people, working with young people and working with poverty outreach. So it had to be a spirituality or philosophy for life that wasn't just about telling people how they should behave, because that stuff didn't really matter to me. It was about, can this stuff really help anybody anywhere? Because if it can't, it's useless. It has to help people. So that kind of stuff all grew organically for me. And then when I left the church, I suddenly had the world open up to me, because you kind of have to play the game when you work for the evangelical church, especially the Baptist church where I initially trained. You know, you can't read books from other denominations or other religions or spirituality. If they find you, they're going to think you're reading heresy or something. So, but when I did get to step outside and started to read for myself, I just realized there's so much richness in all these philosophies and all these spiritualities that I just sort of sucked it up for the next 10 years. And I really feel that the stuff that you put in your brain that you're fascinated by, that you let sit in there and percolate and you churn over that stuff, then starts to flavor the things that you put out into the world. So it's like bringing things in with the things that you read and that you're interested in, then comes out in the things that you say with your work. It doesn't matter what your work is. You could be a musician or a writer or a photographer or a filmmaker. It doesn't matter. And I think, I did an online course with Werner Herzog, who's one of yours. And he, for me, is one of the most interesting filmmakers ever to have existed. And this course he gave was the biggest thing. He plugs home right on the first lesson. He's like, the best filmmaker, if you want to be a good filmmaker, you read. And he said it 1,000 times, just read. That's what you do. And I'm like, yeah, some people say now that, well, I'm not really a big reader. Find some other way then to take in information. But I'd still encourage you to try reading, because sitting alone with a book and taking in the things that you're interested in, and find the things that you're interested in, will enrich your inner life, so that when you sit down to make something, you know what to speak about. How many of us say, well, I got a camera for Christmas, but I don't know what to point my camera at. Well, maybe that's because you're not putting enough stuff in before you ask for stuff to come out. And that's where you have to start. So taking in all that, like psychology, philosophy, spirituality stuff, is interesting to me already, but I'm disciplined about it, because I want to keep filling up so that when I give things out, it's rich. That's the idea.
Mm. You tell another beautiful story from Werner Herzog, or something you learned from him, is that when he walked from Germany to Paris, he said that just, without taking pictures, just observe what's around you. This ability to focus and to absorb from what gets in through all your senses, to take that up, and then maybe in the future you can make something out of it. But the ability to be still and to observe, which is I think critical also for an artist, right?
Yeah, I mean, he wrote a little book on that as well, which you can find. It's very, very short to read, called Of Walking in Ice. And it's just like a little diary of that walking trip he took across the country. And that really impressed me. I mean, that same course I was talking about, the first task he gives you in that course is to walk 100 miles in any direction. Don't take a camera with you. Just walk and observe. 100 miles. I mean, it's not a small task. Uh-huh. But, he's put his money where his mouth is. He's done more than that. And I thought, wow, yeah, because and his argument is, if you don't learn first how to see properly, you're not going to be able to express what you see to everybody else. It has to start with seeing. And the book he prescribes for that course is a really obscure book by a guy named J.A. Baker called The Peregrine, which is just a guy here in Essex in the UK who wrote, I think in the 50s, about peregrine falcons. It's about birds. And he writes in beautiful prose, really, really descriptive language. And he says, this book has nothing to do with filmmaking. But if you can learn to see how this man sees birds, you will become a good filmmaker. And that's far more important than, what camera do I buy? What technique do I use? What lens is the right one to use? Do I use anamorphic or do I use spherical? What filters should I? He says, I can teach you the technical aspects of filmmaking in 2 weeks, but I can't teach you how to see. You have to do that work on your own. And that's really stuck with me. If I can learn how to see, I'll have things to say.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so important to allow yourself these moments in everyday life to pause, and you also say that walking for you is a very big part, and that walking gets your ideas moving. What is it exactly that happens when you go out for a walk?
Walking is it's like meditation, really. I think a lot of people will practice kind of a mindfulness in many different ways. For me, walking is my meditation. So, and it's not my idea. It's been around for thousands of years. I mean, the whole idea of pilgrimage in any spirituality is taking a long walk and using it as time to think about yourself and your journey and the life, the universe, and everything. That's what it is. And I think that it's creating what I call in the book generative mental space. So this kind of empty, agendaless thinking that can happen. The example I give is I think it's true for a lot of people that we get our best ideas in the shower. That when we're standing in the shower, because there's no screen in front of us, we're not watching anything, we're not in front of a computer, there's no TV on, there's there's usually no radio playing or anything like that, unless it's music, but we're just there and we're still, and we start to focus on water falling on us, and we're just in a very peaceful space. And I think what happens is our conscious mind gets out of the way for a minute, because we're not throwing stimuli at ourselves, and our subconscious mind starts to take over. And I think that our subconscious mind is a better problem solver than our conscious mind, because you probably had the experience where you're trying to think of a solution to a problem, say. You're like, I've got to, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to think of it. And the more you think, the more you rack your brain, and you can't work out what the solution would be. But then you stop, you go, okay, I give up. And then you go on a walk, and then suddenly the solution is there, but you weren't even thinking about it. And I think that's because your subconscious mind takes over, and it can move in more supple ways than our conscious mind. When we think consciously, we try and force things through the same channels, expecting different results or solutions. But when we turn it down and let the subconscious mind, it moves in more supple ways, and things suddenly appear. And I think walking for me helps me to step into that space. So I'm walking, I'm concentrating on not falling over, looking at what's in front of me. Then I'm looking around me. Then I'm listening to sounds and seeing what's going on and taking in the smells. And there's no screen, there's no information, there's no talking at me. And then my subconscious mind can click in, and all that creative thinking can start to happen. And I come home with 10 ideas that I couldn't get when I was sitting at home for a whole day. So that's kind of what it does for me.
Sean, you mentioned some other influences that you've had. Werner Herzog is one name. Van Ho, a Chinese photographer, is another name. What did you take from him that has shaped the way you are as an artist and a photographer?
Van Ho was an interesting one because I think I was already doing photography on the streets that lots of street photographers would tell me this isn't street photography because you're not doing reportage. You're not trying to find characters interacting with each other. You're not photographing little human stories. And I was photographing more light and shadow interacting with someone. And people were often silhouettes, but you couldn't see their faces. And it was about shape and graphical elements. And I thought at the time taking this stuff in, I'm not a street photographer. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. Should I change this? Should I try something else? And as I started posting these images on Instagram, a few people started saying, this reminds me of Van Ho's work. This looks like a Van Ho shot. I didn't even know who he was. And I went and looked him up. And suddenly I had this realization like, oh, this isn't new. So lots of other people have done this sort of photography before. Like another photographer in the same kind of vein is Ray Metzger. You know, people have done this stuff where you expose for the highlights, let the shadows fall dark and play with the shapes. And whether or not you want to call that street photography didn't matter to me anymore. Because just the fact that other people had done it legitimately gave me permission to keep doing it and enjoying it. And you can put whatever label you want on it. So Van Ho kind of like unlocked all that for me and gave me permission to keep going in that direction for myself that I kind of found intuitively.
There's a quote from Gary Winogrand you have in your book, and he said, I don't have anything to say in my pictures. My only interest in photography is to see what something looks like as a photograph. What is it that you try to communicate with your pictures? Or are you going into the direction of Winogrand that you just try to create an aesthetically pleasing image and that you don't care so much about what others put into it, what kind of meaning, or is there something that you like to communicate with your pictures?
I think like the general stuff I throw up on something like Instagram is like Winogrand said. It's just I don't have a meaning for it. There's no message to get across. I mean, sometimes there is, but often there isn't. It's just something I reacted to in the day that I thought was interesting. So I photographed it and shared it with people. I'm a lot more kind of disposable with that Instagram stuff. It's not that important to me. It's really reactive and just to share and make. And it gives me a target to keep making sure that I'm out there exercising my visual eye. So yeah, it is a little bit Winogrand. It is a little bit like, I just want to see what stuff looks like photographed, you know? And then if I think it looks kind of cool, I'll show you. And it's not me going like, hey, look at this brilliant photograph. You should order a print from me. It's just me going, hey, I saw this thing today. It's pretty cool. And then I keep going because you can't post. I try and post every day. I'm not good enough as a photographer to post a great photograph every day. I don't know anyone who is. So you couldn't have that kind of output and be producing incredible stuff. It's far more a scrapbook. But then when it comes to specific projects I want to work on, and I have a few coming up, then I do know what I want to say. But that's because it's a specific project and I'm trying to say something specific with a set of images. So project-based stuff, for sure, I have a message and I know what I want to say. But the general daily stuff, it's just for fun.
It's a nice distinction you make there to use Instagram as sort of a scrapbook where you put up things and you show things that you react to, and it takes a lot of pressure off people who think that, okay, every time I click the shutter button, something great has to happen or has to be all meaningful. I came across something similar that William Eggleston said, kind of like the quote from Winogrand. He also said that he just likes to see what something looks like as a photograph. And often it's enough. And then you have a collection of images, and maybe some out of that, some project emerges, and that you can dig deeper and put more meaning on top. I really like that, that kind of work. Yeah.
It's good to work with levels, I think, for any photographer. You should have photographs which you're making just to experiment, because hopefully you stumble upon new ideas. You have to give yourself space to play and not to be so serious with it or so driven with it. But yes, from there, you're right. I think something might emerge. You go, hang on, I'm going to dig in on this because there's something to say with it. Have those levels, play and things you want to say. You don't not. It doesn't all have to be so deep and meaningful. Play as well.
Yeah. And street photography is the same way. You walk along a street and you say maybe something that's just good for a single image, and then you see someone making something. It sparks your interest. You go back, you go a little deeper, you make a connection. You ask someone if you maybe can do a reportage, a documentary. But that I think if you look at street photography or photography in general like that, something really nice can emerge from that. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I guess it is important to take these shots that just like spark your curiosity and post them, see them, put them up on a wall, do whatever with it, because sometimes you only see after the fact what you photographed and what is maybe the meaning, or what was your own thought behind it, your own mindset on the day, for example. That's why I have an Instagram account, which is basically a junk drawer for my photographs, where I just like post whatever, like really, literally sometimes trash I found on the street, because it's not a great photograph, but it sparked curiosity in me. I liked how it looked, and that's why I took the photo. And then maybe later there's something in it, and that's why I keep it.
Absolutely. I think it's great. Yeah.
Sean, you say about yourself that you're a self-teacher, you're self-taught artist, photographer, and that you like to learn new things. And I'd be curious, what's on your curriculum right now? Is there something that you just recently started to learn, some new thing, or something that you want to become better at? Is there something like that?
I'm still reading the stuff that interests me. So I'm still trying to dig into new philosophy, psychology stuff, because I still find that quite interesting. I've just started a book called, I think it's a book by Robert Greene. I think it's called The 48 Human Laws, which sort of looks at different people's motivations, which is early days, but quite interesting. There's a few books I've gotten. I've always got about 6 books on the go. But then I've got the other one is a book called The Courage to Be Disliked by 2 Japanese authors, written as like a student philosopher conversation, which is quite interesting, because I think the courage to be disliked by people and stand by the things that you want to put into the world is a really important thing. And then a really practical thing I've just signed up for to start again is I'm basically taking myself back to studying in September. And I've just enrolled in if I take it all the way to the end, which I might do, will be a 4-year course in counseling, because I have the psychology degree, but in this country you need certification to actually be a professional counselor, and it'd be good to brush up on anyway. So I thought I'd sign up for that. So that will begin end of September. I'll start that. So yeah.
Interesting. We talked about Van Ho and what you took from him, and that ties also back to your interest in psychology a little bit. I think this notion, or you said about yourself that you're quite an introverted person, quite shy, and in Van Ho's work, what he's famous for is to show people, kind of solitary people in urban landscapes, kind of isolated. And I think you wrote something along the lines that that's something that resonates with you as well, and that shows in your photography as well. And that photography is kind of a therapy for you, that you discovered that side of yourself and expressed it through this observation, or your personality in that way, the way you see the world and the way you feel inside the world as an introvert. Can you elaborate a little bit on that thought, and maybe as an example of what reading about psychology, what that looks like, taking that to photography and expressing that in art?
Yeah, I think it was actually 2 artists. Van Ho was one. The other was a painter from America named Edward Hopper, who painted urban scenes and sort of single figures, often in urban spaces. And I was photographing early days street photography, and I was starting to do this. I was starting to photograph on wider angles with spaces and light in spaces and maybe a single figure moving through the space who's fairly anonymous. And I think at the time it was just intuitive. I liked the aesthetic of it. But the more I thought about it, I thought I might be photographing myself, because that's how I feel in a city. I'm not really a big city person. I don't like crowds and noise. And I always feel like I'm moving on the edge through spaces. I'd rather walk on a quiet back alley than down the main street. You know, I'm that person. And in a way, maybe I'm photographing me. So the more people were drawing connections to my work online, saying, this reminds me of Fan Ho, or this reminds me of Edward Hopper. When I looked at their work, I noticed they did that a lot. And especially Hopper, I thought, why is he doing that? And thinking most of his work he's producing in the 1950s in New York City, he's painting a lot. Like 50s post-war New York, that's a very busy, vibrant, economically exciting time where things are happening and people are there and there's a lot of buzz. But he's painting one person sitting lonely in an office. Why is he doing that? Because maybe that's how some of us feel in cities, a little bit isolated, a little bit lonely. And when I saw it in his work, I could see it in my work. And then it was a case of doing that self-awareness thing, thinking, well, who am I? I am an introvert. You know, I'm an INFJ on the Myers-Briggs. I'm a type 1-2 wing on the Enneagram. Like that's a more introvert. I might be a fairly confident introvert, but I am an introvert. I prefer space to noise and crowds. And so perhaps what I was doing intuitively was photographing what I recognized of myself and other people as they walked around, which was a really interesting thing. And again, it goes back to, doesn't it? Like if you get to know who you are, you can work out why you're drawn to the things you can, and then you can start to lean into those things and actually say it with a bit more purpose.
Getting to know who you are is crucial for creating your own artistic voice, and so is to know your limits. And this is also something very central in your book that you talk about, that it's important to know the things that one can control and the things that are beyond one's control, and to let go. What do you mean by that? Why is that so important to know these, or to be able to distinguish between the two?
I mean, this is stuff I've just nicked straight from the Stoic philosophers. This is stuff I've been reading a lot over the last few years, and it's not a new idea. It's been around for thousands of years in so many different, not just Stoicism. It's as important in Buddhism and different aspects of Christianity. Like people have known this stuff for a long time. It's just that we forget it in our day-to-day lives. And when I read it, I realized this idea that so much we cause ourselves so much pain, and especially in our modern era, anxiety, because anxiety, everyone seems to have anxiety issues. And I really think, apart from people who have actual diagnosed anxiety disorders, I'm not talking about them, but the rest of us who just have high or low states of anxiety because we're human beings, so much of that anxiety is caused because we're trying to make something work for us that isn't in our control. So using a really practical example, I can take the very best photographs I can take. I can work very hard on that. That's in my control. I can do that. But when I post that photograph online, I have zero control on the response to it. I don't know how many likes it will get. I don't know how many comments it will get, whether those comments will be good or bad. I don't know if my work will grow to a bigger audience. And anxiety comes in when you think you can control that. I can hack the algorithm. I can make people like me. I can bully them into giving me the attention that I want. When you think you can do that, you will make yourself miserable. But if you start to separate those things out and go, hang on a minute, the response to the work I'm making is not in my hands. It never was. I can do the best work I can do. I can be responsible with little things like when I post and what I tag and all those stupid little things that actually most of them don't really work. I think we know that. You know, we can do all that stuff, but then you have to let the rest go. Like if people don't like the thing you made, it's not the end of the world. People don't like most things most people make. It just means you're normal, because most of us are running off and looking at other things all the time. And we don't have time for everyone. So how much stuff do you look at in a day and you go, oh, no, I don't really care. And you just keep flicking and no, I don't really care about that. And then you find one thing that you like. You passed 40 images that someone worked really hard on that you didn't care about. Well, yours might be one of those 40 for somebody else, and they probably will be. That's just the reality. So if you start to limit yourself, and there's a great book called A Guide to the Good Life, terrible title, but it's a book by a guy named William B. Irvin, and he really unpacks the Stoic philosophers. And he uses the example of a tennis match. And he says that if you go into a tennis match going, I'm going to beat this guy, you're probably, you stand a good chance of playing a bad game, because you're trying to anticipate his game and change yours, and you're playing on his terms. So it becomes competition. Instead of going in and going, I'm going to play the very best game of tennis I can, and I'm going to leave whether I win or lose to the fates. I'm going to do the very best I can do, but I cannot guarantee the results. All I can do is my best. It's like marathon runners. You know, a good marathon runner knows that the trick is not to beat the guy in front of you for 26 miles, because he might start faster, end slow. You don't know what his pace strategy is. The trick is to run the very best 26 miles you can, and where you wind up, you wind up. You did your best. What else could you do? You don't have another gear. If you've worked out your best strategy and stuck to it, you have to let the results go. And I think if we learn to do that with the things that we make the very best work we can, be disciplined, be good at putting in the time, teaching ourselves new skills. The minute you share it with the world, that's kind of nothing to do with you, because it's not in your power. And if you can get that in your head, you can give yourself a lot more peace. It doesn't mean you're a bad photographer. It doesn't mean you're a bad artist. Some of the best photographers I know have tiny followings online. And I know cats on Instagram with 10 million followers. It doesn't mean their owners are brilliant photographers. It means people like cats. It doesn't mean what you think it does. So let it go. It's not in your control. Do the best work you can and give yourself a good night's sleep based on that. It's cleared up so much for me that I felt it had to go in the book.
Mm. Yeah, that's great advice. Run your own race, as you also put it in your book, and the recommendations to read the Stoics. I love the Stoics as well. I think it's a brilliant operating system, even nowadays, some 2,000 years later. But it's still, if you read the text of the Stoics, Seneca, Epictetus, or it's so helpful these days, dealing with social media, with our problems. We talked about that, how to deal with trolls, and to feel less anxious, and to deal and to give yourself more space, and not to overreact and put too much pressure on yourself. Sean, you've been interviewed by many people. You've been on many podcasts, and I always wonder, I prepare for this interview, I read your books, and I kind of try to think of things that might be of interest. But is there anything that you wondered that you've never been asked in these interviews? Something that you'd like to put out, but you said, like, why has no one ever asked me that?
Not really. I've been asked a lot. I think the list is pretty long. Yeah, not really. I can't think of anything. I guess one of the things I did learn the last while, that I've only been asked a couple of times, that is a nice thing to share, is about the writing process. Mm-hmm. Because I'm not an author. Well, I mean, I am, because I wrote a book, but it's not like it's my job. I'm not Stephen King or something. Like, I just wrote a book because I felt I had some stuff to say, and I learned some really interesting stuff in writing a book. And one of the key bits of advice I found, which was really, really helpful for anyone who might be a writer or want to write, is to separate the modes of writing. So what I would often do is I would give myself an hour a day where I had to write. And if I was on a roll, I could write for longer, but I had to write for 1 hour, even if I didn't feel like I got anything done. And I felt like that's the only way to get through a book, is just to have that disciplined slot that you force yourself to work in, but then choose what you're going to do with that hour. Either write, let things flow out of you, just pour it onto a page, or edit, but don't do both. Because I think what I started to do at the beginning was write a lot and then go, oh, I could say that sentence better. And I go back and go, oh, actually, no, let me tidy that up. But then I've forgotten where I was and I was getting confused. And so it's best if you're ever going to get into writing, pick what you're doing with a session. Today, I'm just going to flow. Don't edit. Don't clean it up. Just vomit stuff on a page. Get as much as you can out. Let it flow. Don't make it neat and tidy. Get the ideas out. Then the next day, if you decide today is going to be an edit day, I think I wrote some good stuff yesterday, I want to clean it up. Mm-hmm. If you get ideas, just jot them down on the side and then work on edit. I'm going to clean this up, change this paragraph, tighten sentences, all that kind of stuff. But don't try and chop and change, because you lose thoughts and you lose momentum. So pick your mode. Pick the mode you're going to work in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's
good.
actually pretty good advice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sean, it's often said that an image often reveals as much about the artist as it does about the subject or the scene. Has there ever been an image or a body of work so personal that you've been afraid to show it to the public?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's definitely valid. Sometimes you do take something, you think people aren't going to get this, but it's special to me and you keep it to yourself for sure. I'm working on a portrait project at the moment that is going to be probably going to take about 3 years to complete. And it's very slow going, but no one has seen or will see those images until it's done, because this is a complete body of work. It's not about the single images. And I want to collect over a long period of time and then edit and present them as a set, maybe a book that talks about a very particular subject matter. So things like that, when it comes to timing about how I release or share stuff with the world, for sure. Like Instagram don't get those images. It's not for Instagram. It's for something different and hopefully more weighty than that. So yeah, I definitely have things like that. Yeah, and I suppose there's sentimental pictures about people who are close to me that I wouldn't share with the world because they were private moments that mean a lot to me. So there's definitely that side of it as well. But yeah, good question. I totally get that.
Sean, you've come a long way as an artist. What is something that, knowing what you know now, some advice that you would give to your younger self?
Be patient. I think I was and I'm sure a lot of people relate to this, I was I wanted to get further than I was quickly. I had to get better in terms of skills. People had to take me seriously. Like I was in a big hurry for some reason. And I'm not sure. I think I was just in my 20s. I was just excited, and I think that caused me a lot of anxiety or stress because I put so much pressure on myself. And I would literally say, well, by the end of this year, I have to, and by the end of that year. But how could I know when particular things would happen? You can't plan so much of it. And some things happened faster than I thought. And a lot of things happened a lot slower than I thought they would in terms of building myself up as a photographer and skills and the rest of it. And so I think patience is the biggest thing. Because you don't enjoy the journey if you load yourself with so much pressure. You just are constantly beating yourself up that you're not learning fast enough and not progressing fast enough, instead of celebrating the things you are learning and you are discovering, and that you are enjoying taking your camera every day and making images, instead of going, I'm not far enough along, so I don't enjoy it. Enjoy it. Slow down and celebrate your successes more than you beat yourself up for how slow things are, because we all get where we need to be. I really think that. Some things have taken me longer, and that's okay, and when I get down the road to something I really wanted to get to, I kind of always end up looking back and going, but how could that have been any faster? What was I thinking? How long did I think this thing should take? Of course it was always going to take that long. And that hopefully teaches me that whatever has to come later, and I've got a long way to go with all this stuff, that to be kinder on myself going forwards, and remember that things take longer than you think they do. So be nice to yourself while you're journeying,
Yeah, we often overestimate what we can get done in a day or in a week, and underestimate what we can really achieve in a year, how much that can be. So, yeah. Coming back to your interest in spirituality and philosophy that we've already touched on a bit, what kind of connection do you see between the two and photography?
I kind of create a lot of links with the videos that I make, because I think everything comes from the same space, really. I talk a lot about light and shadow in particular in my work, and how I've learned things about light and shade in psychology, looking at Jung's work and the shadow and that kind of stuff. And, when spiritualities talk about moving through shadow times in our lives and how that grows us and forges us, I've applied principles I've learned in psychology or philosophy to my use of light and shadow in images. I'll give you a very specific example. So this is why I'm reading this Courage to Be Disliked book at the moment, because I don't like being disliked. I want everyone to like me and think I'm nice. And I think that I've because I'm a perfectionist, that type 1 perfectionist, I want to be seen like I have everything together. And I'm afraid of my own shadow and darkness and mistakes and the things that all of us want to hide. You know, Jung's shadow, hide it and just push the persona forward and try and convince everyone that we're only the good stuff about ourselves and there is no bad stuff to find. We all have the bad stuff we're trying to find. And I think there was a weird link between the photography I was taking and starting to realize I had to integrate the shadow, as Jung talks about it, to own those dark parts of myself and go, that is part of who I am. Now the job is to admit it to myself, not suppress it, but try and point it at better things, good things, but not pretend it's not there, because that's when I think you get into trouble and it starts surfacing in ways you don't pay attention to. So this was at a time where I was taking lots of black and white images and really crunching down the shadows. And when I started in photography, I think a lot of people do this, we're obsessed with dynamic range. We've got to have all those highlight details and all the shadow details. I have to be able to see like my human eye sees, or into every shadow I can see all the detail, into all the highlights I can see the detail. But a lot of the best art we see doesn't work like that. If you go back to the old painters and look at Rembrandt's portraits or Caravaggio's paintings, the shadows are dark. You can't see anything in those shadows. And that creates beautiful light and shade and shape on faces and in scenes. Shadows, if we embrace them, are our friends. And as I was starting to do that with my photography, it was the same time, embrace shadows, crunch them down instead of trying to brighten them up and bring back all the detail, use them to make interesting shapes. Was the same time I was working out that if I don't learn how to integrate the shadow part of myself and embrace it and say that it's a part of me and it makes me a more interesting person and helps me tell a more interesting, nuanced human story with my work, because I'm not pretending everything's brilliant. I'm being honest about the good and the bad. I create better pictures with my life and my photographs. So I do that all the time. I kind of take the things I'm learning across the board. And I mean, I feel like there's so many connections like that you can make.
You are a musician yourself, and listening to you, I thought about something I did as a musician as well. As sometimes we wrote songs like where we just had to get like some things out of our system, like getting that crap, the darkness, the shadows out, and just to like get away from them. Basically, the song might be crap, but it's good to have it written down, played it a couple of times. Well, the song sucks. Okay, let's move on.
Yeah.
And hearing you talking about it, it's actually something I should try to do more in my photography again now. But as you said, everybody wants to be seen in a good light, wants to be liked, and like output only like good stuff, the perfect stuff. Nothing like is, well, that's something I made. Now what do I do with it? That's actually, you made me think now. Like I probably already knew, but forgot how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Cartier-Bresson. You know, your first 10,000 photographs of your worst. You have to get them out. If you try and just only take a photograph when you know it will be brilliant, you're going to take a long time to get those 10,000 photos out of your system. And there's a writer named Julia Cameron who wrote a book called The Artist's Way, and she has an exercise in that book called Morning Pages. And basically, what she encourages any artist to do is to sit down every single morning, first thing in the morning. Have a journal that you just take out on a desk and write 3 pages. It doesn't matter what you write, but just get it out of your head. Whatever it is, write free form, whatever you're thinking or feeling, get it out on the page and dump it out every morning like that. Because externalizing that, as good or bad as that stuff is, it's not meant to be good writing. No one's supposed to read it, but vomit that stuff out. Get that darkness and light out on a page. Let it be messy and confusing, because you're going to learn things from it if you let it flow freely. And that works for, like you said, music and photography and writing, everything. Like you have to purge that stuff out. It doesn't need to be shared with Instagram, but you have to let yourself make bad stuff, because there will be something to learn from it.
And maybe that's also a way to deal with some creative block that you have, like so something you talk about in your book. We don't always feel inspired to do things or to jump out of the house and to take pictures or create whatever kind of work we want to create. Sometimes it takes a hurdle to jump over and to get moving, and to make that first step, and then inspiration comes. But if you sit around and wait for this moment or from something to come out of the blue to strike you, it might never happen.
Mm. Absolutely. Yeah. Putting that stuff into practice just keeps you more inspired more often, I think, because you're staying aware, you're processing, you're putting stuff out, even just for yourself, you're learning all the time. It fuels you up, it fuels up that creativity tank so it doesn't run dry as quickly and you're not stuck for ideas. Yeah. I mean, I say the same thing in the book, that the muses find you working, is the way that I put it. Is like, so many of us go, well, I can't get up and pick up the camera because I don't have any ideas. Well, you're not going to get any on the couch. But if you pick the camera up and you go out and start taking bad stuff and experimenting, that's where the muses will find you most often. So you have to start making most of the time. You have to start making to get ideas. And the best artists know this stuff. So yeah, I think that the muses always find you working is a good one to remember for sure.
For me, it's usually always the thing. It's way harder for me to stop doing something than to start it. So if I can get started with a project, like writing, like you said, write for 1 hour, I end up writing for 7 hours straight. Because I actually started and I didn't just think about writing for 7 hours. I started writing. And I guess it's the same thing like a muse kicking in. Once you start, you get in the flow and you will start to create and actually do something.
Absolutely.
Sean, I got one more question, and it's like, if you think about your portfolio, you've taken many pictures over the years. You posted them on Instagram and showed them other places. Is there any image personally for you that sticks out? If you think about your portfolio, are there some images popping up that have special importance to you?
I mean, I'm not too sentimental about the stuff I shoot. I feel like I haven't. The more special images that I produced are portraits, probably. So the portraits I did with the Himba tribe in Africa have a special place just because of the memories around that trip and who those people are. Was a really fulfilling project to do. And then the 3 portraits I have of my mentors that hang in my lounge, which I made a video on as well, about going back to South Africa and finding these men who had helped me when I was a young man without a father, grow up a bit and how to navigate being a man. Like I was grateful to them and felt that making those portraits for them kind of really celebrated their journey. So those are kind of special for what they mean to me. And then maybe the cover of the book, actually, there's an image on the cover of The Meaning in the Making, which is a girl standing on a bridge. That bridge is just next to Westminster. The bridge goes over the Thames, and that I want to make a video on this actually, because that image taught me an important lesson about we're not always the best judge of our own work. Because I took that image, the way I took that image was a few of us were down on Waterloo Bridge, which is one bridge over on the Thames, and there were Extinction Rebellion protests. So we were photographing at the protests. And my friend Joshua Jackson, who you might know his stuff on Instagram, he's a fantastic photographer. He got an alert on his phone saying that there were protests kicking off in Westminster in front of the Houses of Parliament. So we ran down South Bank to get across Westminster Bridge to go see what was going on. And while we were running across the bridge, I saw this girl who was dressed quite interestingly. She had these wings on her back with the bag on her shoulder looking into the water. And I very, very instinctively, I almost didn't stop running. I put the camera up and snapped that shot and then carried on running. I didn't think about it more than that. And there were thousands of people on the bridge. You can't see them because she was in her own little space there, but it looks like an incredibly peaceful moment. So many other people around. So in my head, it was kind of a weird reactionary shot on a very busy day. And when it came time to make the book, I have a friend named Vla who did the cover design and the interior for me. And we're talking about ideas for the cover. And I'm like, maybe it has to be, about creativity, but about being broken. So maybe some kintsugi idea, or, he's coming up with all these different ideas for the cover. And he said to me right at the beginning of that conversation, he says, what about that image you took of the girl on the bridge that you posted? I'm like, no, it's a silly image. Let's move on. Like, we'll find something better than that. That was like a quick reactionary shot. And so he patiently went away and tried these other designs for me. We'll try your kintsugi idea. He does all these things and he presents all these ideas. There's a lot of work. And I'm like, nah, it's not right, is it? It's not right. Nah, it's not right. It's not right. And he waited about 2 months and then he comes back to me and says, hey, what about that image of the girl on the bridge? And I suddenly saw it differently. Like I'd had enough space from it and I could see it for what it was, not what I thought it was in the second that I took the photograph. And it was perfect suddenly. Taught me that we're not necessarily the best judges of our own work. And it's good to listen to the reactions of other people and how they see what you put into something, because that's part of it. I might not have intended to fill that image with the meaning that it has now for me, because I couldn't. It was such a quick shot to take, but it has that meaning now. And it causes that reaction in other people, even if I didn't intend it. And now that I can see that, I can embrace it in a different way. And it's a much deeper image for me. So it just taught me, get that advice from trusted people and listen to other people, and don't assume you know everything about your own images, because you probably don't.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great story, and it nicely illustrates what photography can do. You freeze a moment in time in a certain context, but that context might change depending on the context that you publish an image, for example, or where you show it in an exhibition or online, and then what kind of reactions that sparks in other people. It's beautiful, and what photography can do. Sean, thank you very much for your thoughts. It's a pleasure to talk with you about the philosophy behind photography and creativity, and not talk about gear and all that stuff. But that's something you do on your YouTube channel as well. Lots of great videos out there to see. Well, I think at this point we might open up the round and see if there's some questions out there, something we haven't asked, and so please ask Sean whatever you'd like to know. Ja, das war das Interview mit Sean Tucker, und wenn auch du künftig mit dabei sein möchtest bei dieser interaktiven Form des Podcasts, dann kannst du dies im Rahmen von Abenteuer Reportagefotografie tun, das ich gemeinsam mit Thomas Jones von den Fotologen mache. Da gibt es jetzt auch ein spezielles Paket dafür, eben nur bei den Podcasts mit dabei zu sein. Schau es dir mal an, den Link findest du in den Shownotes. Vielen Dank fürs Zuhören und bis zum nächsten Mal. Dein Kai.